So I'm really excited about this next panel and wanted to be the one to introduce it. It's called Unlocking the Promises of Distributed Energy Resources, or DER. This is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart. For the last about 6 months, I've been convening a group of people way smarter than me about what the relationship should be between distributed energy resources and CCA. And just to give you a sense of how gung-ho I am, I was thinking about hawking CCE plus DER hats and T-shirts in the lobby. And I don't know if it's time yet, but I'm hoping that after this panel, there's really going to be a market for those. So you may be asking, why does the Center for Climate Protection care about DER? Well, 4 main reasons. First, developing local resources reduces greenhouse gas emissions by avoiding line loss and using energy more efficiently. Second, we need climate solutions that can be implemented anywhere, and there are few places in the United States where the local economic development benefits that accompany DER implementation are not appreciated. Third, if we want to get to 100% renewable energy for California, we will have to use the energy we generate and the grid much more efficiently, and distributed energy resources, which are flexible resources, are a critical component of that effort. Finally, DER fosters energy democracy by building local capacity and allowing more people to benefit from a broader array of services. This gets to what Senator Allen was referring to today as creating a broad tent: jobs and more services. And I should also add that for reasons that I believe will come out in this panel, we think community choice energy agencies are uniquely positioned to implement distributed energy resources for maximum advantage, albeit working closely with utilities. I now have the pleasure of introducing panel moderator Dr. Rick Brown. Rick will then introduce the rest of the panelists. So Rick is president of TerraVerde Renewable Partners, which he founded in 2009. TerraVerde, an independent energy advisor supporting client-based project development and management, and distributed energy resource program implementation and management. Rick is a dynamo. Sometimes it seems like every time I'm on the phone with Rick, he is talking to me from another part of California. This guy gets around. Over the past 7 years, TerraVerde has implemented $327 million in distributed energy resource projects, including 70 megawatts of solar, 13 megawatts of battery storage, and $43 million in energy conservation measures. They have done this with in over 300 buildings on behalf of schools, cities, transit agencies, water districts, and corporations throughout California. Please welcome Rick and our other panelists.
Thank you. Thanks. So we have a really great panel today who've prepared some, I think, really important information. I'm going to do a real quick go-round. To my right here is Obadiah Bartholomy from SMUD, and he's going to be talking about SMUD's motivation and desired outcomes for their DER strategy. They have really taken some leaps forward around this. Then we have Lorenzo Kristov, who's with the California Independent System Operator, and he's going to be talking about the existing and possible opportunities for DERs to participate in markets and address the duck curve at the local level, where it can be done much more efficiently and effectively and save more GHGs, as Barry was talking about earlier. Then we have Laura Manz from Navigant. She has a consultant and is going to be talking about how CCAs can help harmonize local resources and customer acquisition. And then finally, Beth Reid from Olivine will be talking about some demonstration projects, actual things on the ground and opportunities in the wholesale market and about non-distributed resources. So we're going to be doing it real quick, boom, boom. I'm going to give some just really brief context. The first question that we need to think about is, why should CCAs care about distributed energy resources? The fact of the matter is, many CCAs might think they need to move slowly towards expanding a DER program because they have other operational priorities, there are financing issues, they don't have the project management capacity, and because of policy uncertainty. On the other hand, there's some very good reasons why we believe that CCAs should get going with DERs very early in their lifetime. One is customer engagement and brand recognition. By using the power of bulk procurement, CCAs can get past that. What is a CCA? Why am I part of this? By engaging customers directly in programs that get them to have that identity. The second is, we definitely believe that there are revenue generation opportunities out there. Lorenzo is going to talk about that. By having CCAs act as the aggregators of various DERs and being able to sell them into those markets that are emerging, both at the distribution and at the bulk level, and provide revenues for their CCA to help them with their economics. A third part is cost avoidance. Locationally optimized DERs, incentivizing customers to put in these resources in locations that help shape your load so that your overall wholesale procurement costs go down, is a really important way of staying competitive. And then obviously there's the local economic development piece that Barry's talked about, and there is the reduction of market risk by diversifying your portfolio. So these are some of the broad brush ideas that we've been thinking about, that we're working with some CCAs on. I want to talk very specifically, though, about what I call the not-so-hidden cost of a 50%, much less a 60 or 100% RPS. The CEC has estimated that to reach the state's 50% renewable goal by 2030, it's going to require at least $5 billion in transmission grid infrastructure upgrades. I think that's a low number, because this past fall, Southern California Edison, in an analyst report, said that they're going to have to spend $2 to $4 billion a year for the foreseeable future to support California's RPS goals. Extrapolate that to PG&E, extrapolate that to SDG&E, and other folks involved in the grid, and you're now looking at more like $10 billion a year. And these numbers only represent the cost of transmission upgrades. The distribution network will also require additional investment. One much lower cost alternative to this either $5 billion or $10 billion a year price tag is the implementation of local battery storage and solar with advanced inverters and demand response measures to provide non-wire DER grid services. One quick example. In November, PG&E announced they were deferring a $143 million transmission upgrade. Why? Because of the growth of DERs in the greater Fresno area. Now, the reason it caught my attention is because our company helped a bunch of school districts in that greater Fresno area put in 40 megawatts of solar and batteries over the last 3 years. None of those schools, by the way, got any economic benefit from offsetting that cost. They were not put there in a strategic way. It just so happened that by them putting in those DERs, they reduced the cost to overall ratepayers. This can be done. Another example is the California Energy Commission with Navigant Consulting came out with a report that said that in the southern San Joaquin Valley, instead of having to spend $300 million to do transmission upgrades, they could do it for $30 million with non-wire DER alternatives. And we're actually in discussions with Edison about potentially working with some of our schools to help do that. In the process of helping interested customers procure behind-the-meter solar storage and energy conservation, and then aggregating these to generate grid support revenues, as I said earlier, CCAs can make a strategic choice to incentivize the implementation of DERs in locations that modify their overall load shape in ways that reduce wholesale procurement costs, benefiting all CCA ratepayers. That's the magic bullet. Finally, in partnership with MCE Clean Energy, with Patheon, and with the Center for Climate Protection, we just were awarded or announced that we were awarded a local government challenge grant that's going to help us test out this model. And part of the grant is to also disseminate our findings to the CCA community. So we look forward to sharing that information with you over time. With that, I'm going to turn it to Obadiah to kick us off and talk about SMUD's strategy around DERs.
Great. Thank you, Rick, and thank you all. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to be here and learn about the CCA business model. Many of you may know me better as Panama's brother, but I actually manage a distributed energy strategy group within SMUD, and so I'll talk to you a little bit about what we've been going through over the last year and a half in developing that strategy and implementing it. So starting out as a utility that has had about 60 years of selling an invisible product to our customers that hasn't had the most exciting attributes to it as invisible, and really the customers just expect it and don't value it. Seeing this growth of DERs has presented a number of challenges to that traditional business model, and internally there are a lot of folks that have viewed those as big threats to our business. Flat or declining load growth. We've had flat sales for the last 10 years and expect about a 10 to 20% drop over the next 10 years. Uncertainty regarding our future business model and where we're going to generate revenue from. Advancements in emerging technologies that are becoming much more price competitive, and so our customers are making those choices today. Increasing regulatory pressure for a more distributed future. And rising customer expectations as well as competition that's threatening our customer relationships. Those are all the kind of negative themes that have come up as threats around this DER future internally that we were kind of facing as we looked at developing a strategy. On the opportunity side, we definitely recognize that building and transportation electrification would be able to help us grow load eventually and also decarbonize the energy system, which was a key objective of our board of directors, as well as most of the staff that work within the utility. Business model innovation would help us identify and create new revenue opportunities. New cost-effective technologies would actually enable the transactive grid of the future and really enable some different ways of interacting with our customers with those technologies. As well, being able to leverage the technologies and the regulatory support to try and create better reliability overall on our system. And finally, strengthen our customer relationships by both advising them and actually providing them with distributed energy solutions. Those were really the things that rose to the top as we were thinking about how we could look at this really from an opportunity perspective. In working with our executive team over several meetings, I think we had about 8 or 10 offsites with them around over a year-long process in working out some of these strategies. We started out thinking about what were the strategic outcomes that we wanted to accomplish as it relates to distributed energy. First off, being the preferred energy services provider and advisor was something that both resonated with our board and executive teams, engaging our customers around new products and services and helping advise them on the right choices to make as they were facing an increasing proliferation of options. On the grid reliability side, rather than viewing DERs as a threat to reliability, trying to figure out how we could actually promote enhanced reliability, have better voltage profiles for our customers, and faster response times to outages by leveraging the capabilities of distributed resources is a key outcome that we're looking for there. On the rates side, rather than viewing that revenue loss as a threat, really trying to create new value streams from the distributed energy resource deployments, both in terms of deferrals of long-term grid investments as well as new business models that would lead to new revenue streams for us. Carbon reduction, really contributing more broadly to regional carbon reduction. The percent that's electricity that was mentioned earlier of 20% of statewide, I think we're at even less than that in Sacramento. Maybe only 15% of Sacramento's emissions are from the electricity system. So really huge opportunities in transportation and building, heating, and water heating. And then finally, around access, really trying to make sure that DERs are not just something for the wealthy or well-off, but really something that all of our customers could participate in and receive benefits from, even if they're not participating. So those were the things that our executive team really wanted us to focus on in terms of developing strategies. It's much broader than just a purely financial look and really trying to guide the direction of our utility looking into the future. A couple of highlights of elements that came out of that strategy. On the solar PV side, recognizing that our customers want solar and that we have really a tremendous asset in the grid and economies of scale to be able to provide that to them very efficiently. We are scaling up our solar shares programs both for residential and commercial customers. We have 2 programs that are launched and 3 program offerings that are under development currently and expect to launch in 2018 and 2019 for different flavors of those products, really scaling from about 11 megawatts of participation in 2016 to now what we're looking at is actually 150 megawatts by 2020 of solar shares participation. On the electric vehicle side, our current promotion and kind of combined awareness campaign, but also customer incentive is really focused around a free fuel for 2 years offer to our customers, where we will pay for the electricity costs for a typical EV for a 2-year period on an upfront rebate to the customers. As well, we're focused around workplace and multifamily incentive offerings and creating a DC fast charge safety net network for our customers so that range anxiety is no longer an issue. On the energy efficiency side, we're looking to fuel switching pilots for heat pump water heaters. We just launched a $1,500 rebate for heat pump water heaters for our customers and are really working closely with CEC staff to try and come up with a framework under SB 350 to allow for crediting under the energy efficiency standards. We also have 2, and we're looking to recruit a 3rd builder for an all-electric homes pilot, and then we're working on a variety of different commercial building electrification retrofit incentives. Finally, on energy efficiency, in the interest of trying to make that the outcomes from our efficiency programs more visible to us, we're working on pay-for-performance energy efficiency programs to try to move towards measurable outcomes from those efficiency programs. The last 2 that I'll highlight are a couple of cross-cutting initiatives that I really think are foundational for us in engaging and benefiting from the DER proliferation. The first is on our distribution system operations. We're making a pretty significant investment in an advanced distribution management system and distributed energy resource management system to be able to give us visibility, forecasting, and dispatch of distributed resources, which will lead to the enhanced grid reliability that I was mentioning under much higher levels of DER adoption. On the planning side, so that's kind of operational focused, but on the planning side, we're working with a software developer to put together a DER planning tool that will forecast at the customer level the adoption of different combinations of distributed resources under various potential future rate structures, which is really critical for us as we think about deployment of storage resources and how customers are going to respond to our rate structures, both from a deployment and operation of those devices. We're really going to have lots of different iterations of rate structures to have to think about and look at the net value from. It'll also allow us to do distribution deferral projects much more quickly, allowing tighter planning for optimizing our capital investments and getting both any kind of localized incentive or rate structure right as we're thinking about its deferral benefit. So I'll leave it there and pass it to the next.
Very good. Thank you. And in planning this session, I had to ask Obadiah to take 50 slides and bring them down to just this few. There's a lot more material behind that, a lot of grist in terms of the substance of how they're using DERs to think about this future. And so I encourage you to find him afterwards and pepper him with your questions. I'm going to turn it over to, actually, I've got, we're not going to do these slides next. We're going to have Lorenzo go next, and then we'll go to Laura.
Thank you, Rick. I want to talk a little bit about the status of DERs and what their opportunities are right now. And really the essential message is that there are some well-defined revenue opportunities for DER to take advantage of. We are creating, or we have and we are creating more in the California ISO markets for DER to participate in wholesale markets. But I think more important, there are areas where DER can have really significant value, but that's not really well recognized yet, that's not really quantified yet, that's not really well defined in terms of having actual products and services that have enough definiteness to them as to performance characteristics, value, how they get compensated, how they get procured. And it's these areas that are not well defined yet that I think represent opportunities, especially for CCAs, to think about how they want to enhance their own systems and how this value may become more of a reality that shifts the cost benefit for DER. So when I use the word DER, I basically mean everything that's below the ISO system. That is, where we meet the distribution system, there's a transmission distribution substation and the distribution wires. There's the utility side of the meter, which is the wires themselves, and then there's the customer side of the meter. DER, as a term, includes all of that. It includes traditional energy efficiency, demand response, electric vehicles and charging stations, rooftop solar, utility scale solar on the distribution grid, different types of storage. All of these things are DER because they're connected down at distribution level. And they represent really one of the two major revolutions that are happening in the electricity industry now. The first one being just renewable generation itself, utility scale on the grid, more and more plentiful, displacing more traditional resources, especially fossil fuel resources. But the other is decentralization. We've had for 100-some years a model of electricity, a paradigm that says the resources are out here, they're big central station stuff, the electricity moves over these wires, customers at the other end, and they just turn lights on and off and do different things, and they consume. And this bifurcation between resources and loads and one-way movement of energy has dominated the industry for decades. Now that's all changing, and the decentralization revolution is becoming more and more possible, driven by customer demands. That is, the possibility to look at my premises, my house, my commercial building, my farm, my factory. Think about, what do I need energy for? What are the things that I'm trying to do? And now there's all kinds of new equipment and control systems that enable me to meet a lot of my energy needs locally, on site, in a cost-effective manner. That trend is only going to increase. And as it does, the relationship between the grid and the end-use customer starts to change. The distinction between resources and loads start to change because you get down to the level of a building with a lot of DER installed. Sometimes it's a load, sometimes it's a resource. It's flipping back and forth between whether it's taking energy from the grid or it's putting energy onto the grid. So all these conventional concepts really are fading from relevance or from dominance as we move into this new model. So at ISO, we recognized a few years ago that this revolution of decentralization was going to have impacts on the ISO system coming across that transmission distribution interface. And the relationship between us and distribution utilities was going to have to change. In fact, it was going to have to become a relationship because for the most part, we didn't have to talk to distribution utilities very much. All they did was take energy from the grid and deliver it to customers. Now there's a lot happening out there that's going to flow back and affect us on the grid. So, number one, how do we manage that transmission distribution interface in new ways? And DER have a significant role to play there. They're not just equipment that's out on the grid that's using the grid. They're also equipment that's out on the grid that contributes to managing a reliable system. Looking at those contributions, valuing them, compensating them is an important part of the story. So in the ISO markets, we have a couple of things that are, I think, interesting new ways of using DER. One idea is that they can be demand response. The idea is to take a battery, put it behind the meter of a fairly large building, like a commercial building. And that battery can essentially act to offset load at certain times, and so it looks like demand response. The demand itself may not actually be reducing, but the fact that the battery is now supplying some of it looks like demand response to the ISO. And we have facilities in our markets, not only single buildings, but aggregated across multiple sites that participate as demand response resources. They can provide imbalance energy and something we call non-spinning reserves. It's a type of reserve capacity that we use in contingency situations. We also have another model that we designed explicitly for storage. It looks like a generator, except that sometimes it has negative output, which would correspond to when it's charging. And so we created a generator-like model that can participate in all the ISO markets, that is, supply energy, supply contingency reserves, and supply something we call regulation service. Regulation being a 4-second signal to move up and down to manage the instantaneous supply-demand balance on our system. So that's another opportunity where we have well-defined market opportunities. Now, and also this applies to aggregations of DERs, not only single resources, but they can be aggregated over multiple sites into what we call a virtual resource. Now, an interesting thing is that many of the DER developers are really concerned about being in the ISO market because we have these well-defined products. These are known revenue streams. We have well-known requirements for how to participate. We're modifying those requirements to make it easier for DER and DER aggregations. But down at distribution system, this is where the new wealth of possibilities opens up, where the services are not yet well-defined. There are proceedings at the Public Utilities Commission in California to think about services that DER can provide to the distribution system. The first one, and perhaps the most lucrative, might be deferring distribution assets, using DER instead of building a new substation or instead of upgrading wires in some instances. But that has not yet materialized. There are rules for it, but it's still a work in progress. So there are two important ways that I want to mention where revenue opportunities are not well defined, but I think are looming in importance. One of them goes back to the duck curve, and Rick mentioned this when he introduced our panel, that everyone's familiar with the duck curve, this really extreme shape where in the middle of the day the net demand is very low and then it reaches a high peak and a steep ramp in the late afternoon. Well, that's what the ISO sees at system level, but there's a replica, a duckling, at various distribution circuits where you have high penetration of behind-the-meter solar, and you're replicating a similar shape at distribution level. There are lots of really good advantages to being able to manage that shape at distribution level, an ideal function for DER to be able to do. The second is the idea of resilience and what that means. The New York Public Service Commission a few years ago opened up a proceeding called Reforming the Energy Vision, the idea being to change the function of the distribution utilities so they become vehicles for bringing more distributed resources onto the system. Resilience was an important driver of that initiative because they had just experienced Hurricane Sandy, which wiped out New York City and many of the surrounding areas for weeks in some cases. But nobody knows what resilience is yet. It's not well defined. It's not compensated. It doesn't get into the cost-benefit calculations. But local resilience at a municipal level, at a community level, is an ideal application for distributed resources. So both of these, the idea of smoothing these duck shapes on the distribution circuit level and creating resilient communities, are ideal opportunities for distributed resources, and what we need is then to define exactly how do we do the economics, how do we do the financing so that they get implemented.
Thank you, Lorenzo. One thing I want to emphasize is how many times Lorenzo said aggregation. Okay? And that aggregation word is in the title of many of the people in the room here. Just want to point out that consistency there. Laura, I think we have Laura coming up next.
I'm Laura Manz. I'm now with Navigant Consulting. My background is a long time in the power industry. Let me just say that. I've been a grid operator, a grid planner, and then went to working on virtual power plants, and am currently consulting with Navigant and how do we pull this all together. So I would like to talk a little bit through the changing models, just to describe the crossroads, because we're all handling these same set of customers, and at the end of the day, the goal is for everyone to deliver the ultimately great customer experience. And so the utilities are still in charge of the wires. I actually was an engagement group facilitator for the New York Rev, and what we talked about was really being a good steward, but not only being a good steward, but also being able to offer a neutral platform so that the utilities are not in competition with the people trying to, or the solution providers trying to have an end use reaching out to the end-use customer. And so that ISO model that Lorenzo talked about that we used to know as the traditional transmission model and the customers were essentially out of reach is now permeating into the next layers of distribution companies because they are good stewards of these co-owned customers, and we want them to be incented to be an information provider, lower the barriers to entry, and also do a really good job on keeping resiliency, reliability, and so there's a common goal in the touch point to the customer. The ISO, this limited visibility that they have to the customers, we talked a little bit this morning about the eclipse, and nobody quite knows what's going to happen because there's just this uncertainty about how many solar panels are behind a customer meter, how will customers behave. I grew up in the Northeast where our lights were out pretty often, but now I live in SoCal and a little flicker is a big deal. So it's the customer expectations and how that relationship goes. And managing to a new level of detail. When I tell you there's a lot of data that comes into the ISO now, it doesn't begin to even give you a peek into it. And the new level of data is having the industry itself question, how do you manage all these layers of data? And what are the natural handoffs between the transmission company, the distribution company, and then the relationship between the distribution company interface to the customer and community choice aggregation or whoever else is the solution provider. And then I'm going to speak a little bit to community choice aggregation. I've done some work up in the Humboldt County area where Redwood Coast Energy Authority is getting launched in just a couple of weeks, which is really, really great. And they're looking at a new business model. They're looking at how do they change their relationship within the county with the local energy providers. And so that's a whole new level. And what we found is it's a journey together. PG&E is the company up there that is helping with the wires, and we're working out how data gets shared and how communication is done and what's going to happen in the name of reliability. I'm working with some power plants to figure out how do they become part of a portfolio but not become a stranded asset, because especially when you have a power plant that needs to operate, they're a QF biomass, and if they don't make electricity behind that, they're not going to be able to make their wood products. So what are the realities of the customers on every side of this issue? And then with some of the things, I don't know if we've talked about this today, and I think it's been kind of cute that the people working on DER, distributed energy resources, are going, well, what is it that we can do? And in New York, we said, well, you can do resiliency, you can do reliability. Here we go. You can shape, shed, shift, and shimmy. And so it's a little more fun to be in California, don't you think? So shaping is to say, how do we use our aggregated resources? And I think over time, community choice aggregation teams will have more of a personal customer reach and, in a way, an easier time to consolidate this. There are companies such as Beth that allow you to consolidate through the technology. So I'm not saying CCA is the only way you can do it. I don't want anybody to think there's only one way. There are many ways. But CCAs have that really personal touch to the local community, that personal touch to the customers. How can they orchestrate these resources, either through a mix of communications, through a mix of technology? But if you can get a few customers to move to either lower cost hours or a more beneficial time, it raises the value of the entire energy portfolio. So just a few changes might raise the value of that for everyone. Shed, how do you clip your peaks? I don't think there's a new story to be told there. We've been shedding for peak loads for a long, long time. That still has a place in the mix. Shift. We have spent a lot of time in California working on our new market designs. They're no longer new market designs, and we have some really great granular information about what is energy worth. How do we take that and really leverage it? So when prices are negative, how do we actually use negative prices and get paid for using electricity instead of finding someone like the state of Arizona that will take it off our hands for free? And then shimmy, some of the things that Lorenzo talked about. We're getting pretty good at watching solar take away what used to be the peak. We still have instantaneous movements. We still have rapid shifts that we need to move around certain periods of time. And so the overall energy portfolio is pretty good sometimes, but these little fine-tuning moments don't go away. And that's the reality of the physics that I think a lot of people's eyes glaze over when we talk about that. But behind the scenes, those silent hands, if you will, that are working on the grid to keep the lights on are looking at all these little pieces. And so I love the duck curve because there's two pieces to it. One is the duck curve and we watch the energy, but the other thing is the ducks sitting on top of the water and we don't see how fast the feet are swimming underneath. And there's a lot that goes on. There's some public policy implications here for CCAs, and this is sort of a book yet to be written, in my opinion. How will they engage with technology providers? Will they become the sponsor of the program? Will they become the facilitator of a program? How will they actually engage in the community, and what level of ownership will they take? What level of engagement will they take? And that, as I said, is a book yet to be written. The non-wires alternatives, I think, is a place where there really needs to be close collaboration with the local utility. When I was doing the work on the distributed energy resource and REV in New York, one of the things that was clear was that the utilities are looking at reliability. The utilities are looking at resiliency. And we actually defined it as putting the grid back together after it comes apart. So reliability being, how do you plan for your traditional, do I have enough infrastructure, do I have enough resources? Resiliency being the reality that it comes apart, how do we put it back together? An awful lot of customer resources are really good at that. Microgrids, storage, all of that. But you can't be in competition with the local utility that's trying to do the same task. So this is definitely a dance that's going to be sorted out. The steps will be sorted out. So I'll just leave you with some thoughts on benefits and challenges. The CCAs don't have the data, the history, the projections of their local system. Not always having a deep bench of experience yet. We've all got a different model, and so each CCA seems to be coming to the party in their own special way. I think the models will converge over time. And then policies to incentivize customers. There's sort of this notion that, well, why would you pay my neighbor more if I can do the same thing? And those are policy decisions. And of course, it's just the uncertainty of the time of transition. The opportunities, I think, as I said before, great community choice engagement, really focusing on the local issues, the jobs issues, the local economy issues. How do we retrain our workforce? Different challenges that are not uniform throughout, especially this big state. The portfolio and platform management tools that are coming. How do you orchestrate the resources? That's a problem that can now be answered, and answered in a pretty helpful way. And then making decisions that are related to policy more than operations. I think that's good news because policymakers don't have to be engineers to sort this out. The physics are working themselves out through technology. The policymakers can work on the policy. And again, being able to tailor to local demographics, local economic preferences, and really focusing on the community that's in their care. Thank you very much.
For those of you who don't know Olivine, the company started in 2010, and our entire focus is to unlock the value of distributed energy resources. That's really our mission and our goal. We sit in between sort of the retail distribution space and the wholesale space. And our goal is to bring all these things together because, as in most things, and I have a background in large system implementations, is that usually your best benefit and your problem is in the seams. And so we early on said where we want to go is that spot in between retail and wholesale where it's not just technical, there's a policy, all these things kind of come together, and that's where we're going to be able to make the biggest impact. It's also usually the cloudiest place to be.
Beth, I'm going to be your slide mover because our little clicker doesn't work.
Fine with me, if you don't mind.
No worries.
I also like to claim that I've been in the energy business longer than anyone in the room. I try to claim that because there's lots of pictures of me at 6 years old with a hard hat on, standing at power plants. My father was an engineer, and in Niagara Falls, we were quite proud of our power plants. This is where I was born. And so no one would take a child now to a power plant at 6 years old, but I like to claim that that's when I started in the business. It doesn't always work, but... And how I ended up we started working towards Olivine was really looking at making an impact, which is a common theme here at this conference, is how can we make an impact? And the industry certainly has changed a lot in the time I've actually been working in it, and really did a lot of different types of things. Worked at, one of the first things I did in my career was help get some World Bank funds to electrify Thailand. And really be looking at what I grew up with, the idea that if everybody has electricity, the world changes. If everybody has access to it, the world changes. And so the idea of people having access to it and having choice is near and dear to my heart. So how we've gone into this space is our goal is to make these things a reality and figure things out that may not be so obvious. And a lot of times what we find is that things are always better than they might appear and worse than they might appear. I was in a conference about 2 years ago, and it was an energy storage conference, and there was giving awards. And I'm at the table, and I'm listening, and I thought, that sounds like a great project. And as they're talking about, that sounds like my project. And I'm listening, and I'm like, that is my project. What's happening? And they were getting an award for being in the wholesale market. I'd love to tell you they were in the wholesale market, but they were not. They were operating based on our signals as if they were in the wholesale market, but they were not in the wholesale market. Since then, the world has changed a lot. Currently, right now, on any given day in California, Olivine has about 120 megawatts of distributed energy resources in the wholesale market. And that may not seem like a lot when you really think about some other scales, but that's a lot right now to have in the wholesale market. And we have it in various forms and fashions because what our focus is to look at how to create a broader model to bridge these things together. So what we thought might do is talk a little bit about the framework that we've put together and some of the examples of some of the projects. And currently right now we're working with, I can see somebody here, with like the city of Lancaster on an advanced energy community project. One of the things we're doing there is a variety of pieces, but one key thing that I think might be pertinent is we're looking at a distributed energy resource valuation model. One of the things that appears to me anyway is you go into a situation, you're looking at these programs, and we, and certainly CCEs, don't actually really know what each program or what each different placement of a distributed energy resource would actually be to them. And it's different as the LSA, it's different as the CCA than it would be necessarily for a utility. So we're working on a model there, and the framework is funded by CEC, but we are actually going to fund developing the full model. And I would also invite any CCAs, if they would like to participate in that, to please let me know, because the more people we'd like to have in there, the better. We're working in the city of Richmond with Marine Clean Energy. We're trying to develop a distributed energy resource program, in that case, that specifically focuses on low income and also energy resiliency. Those are the two pieces that are key there. We're working with Sonoma. We're really excited about all the opportunities and very specifically how to bring distributed energy resources into play here so that you have a lot more levers to push. The regulatory and operational environment, though, for distributed energy resources is quite different. And it's still evolving, as Laura mentioned. There's a lot of things that are going on. So one of the things that we've done here, this is our implementation and aggregation framework, and thought it was easier to show you a picture than just talk about it, is our focus is to be able to take all the different distributed energy resources and different technical types and not necessarily have to have all these different individual programs. But how can we bring all these together, because the more levers you have, the more value you can get. And so we basically build, our system will sit in the center and act as the interface with the CalISO if necessary, which doesn't, as Laura said, doesn't have to always be that way, but getting pretty much you want to get into the wholesale markets and be able to offset against maybe what other power purchase contracts you have, and operate because we're part of that. We are a scheduling coordinator. We are a DERPA. We are a DER. But our focus is to operate on behalf of the CCA. So one of the things that Laura mentioned is we believe strongly that the CCA should be the program owners and have that customer relationship, really differentiating yourself, bringing value to the customers. But that doesn't mean that you should have all that infrastructure. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the flexibility to be able to try out different programs, different projects, different technologies. So our focus is to do this, and we have this deployed in many, many places, this concept. Another example that Lorenzo brought up is really some of the opportunities because there's different products and different needs in the wholesale market. So you might have a program that might be specifically focused on that. One of the big things that we're working on is the overgeneration opportunities. I think everybody's pretty familiar with where we sit in overgeneration and how that impacts the duct. We work with, in this case, two projects with PG&E, but are working also with the ISO to develop a model where what we would be able to do is pay people, and this goes back to the shift and shimmy idea, is to be able to pay people to shift and actually pay people to consume, where you can support storage as opposed to, say, demand response where you're curtailing. And that's actually a model that exists right now. It's not in the wholesale market yet, but we're hoping to get it there. And we're planning to implement that specifically for low income in several areas. And the next option, I think there's one more slide here. One more. Well, I think everybody knows the vehicle electrification opportunities, but that adds a lot of complexities to the situation. Vehicles is on everybody's mind. How are we going to get electric vehicles into the grid? How are we going to integrate them? But there are a lot of opportunities, and there's also a lot of challenges. And rather to go into the details, just if you want to flip to the next slide there, this is an example of a project that we're doing with the VGI fleet. And so what we've tried to do in a few projects, there was one mentioned earlier, we did a project where we had stationary storage, we had electric vehicles, we had rooftop solar, and we had buildings to do demand response, and looked at how we could stack the value, not of a particular asset or a resource, but of that community, that combination. This is a particular project where we're taking the model, the aggregation framework I just mentioned to you, and actually implementing it in Southern California for a transit authority. So one of the things that we wanted to do here is bring a couple of real-world examples of some of these issues. And as Laura said, there's different ways you can do it, but there really is a bigger umbrella situation here as the market is changing, is we're transforming. California is transforming, and we want to be able to do that in a low-cost way that brings the full value of the distributed energy resources to bear.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
So we have just about 5 minutes for questions. I'm going to ask one question because it's been buzzing through the entire conference today, and then I'm going to just ask whoever wants to stand up, and we'll try to get at least 2 or 3 more in. And the question I want to ask is, I'm hearing today all through the session some people saying, don't jump into doing a program, don't jump into doing DERs when you first start out, wait 3 years, wait 5 years. Other people saying, we're going to start from the very get-go of having a strong emphasis on distributed energy resources. What are the risks of moving fast versus moving slow? What are the benefits of moving fast versus moving slow from your perspectives? And I'll let anybody just take it.
Well, one thing I like to point out whenever there's doubt about whether to be enthusiastic about DERs or not are simply that they're happening. And a lot of this is at the customer level. Customers will look at their energy needs. They'll see opportunities to install equipment behind the meter and control systems and manage their own energy supplies. And that's going to have an effect on the grid all the way up to the ISO system. So it's happening. Either get involved or it'll happen to you.
Laura, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I don't want to paper over how difficult it is to get the CCA started. There's so much uncertainty. You don't know what your customer base is going to be. You don't know how much supply you need. You don't know when you need it. If you have a company like Beth's that can come in and really engage your customers as virtual power plants, you can actually create a full supply set. But I don't want to minimize the challenge of the uncertainty of what's in front of us. And so there is a level of complexity, no doubt, with incorporating DERs. I agree with Lorenzo. They might happen anyway. My guess is if you're in a community choice aggregation effort, you're in touch with those customers for the most part. You have a sense of where the solar is. You have a sense of how many customers are in your group. So I think it's your appetite for complexity, and it's your appetite to, are you good at the game of Tetris or aren't you? Because that's a key piece in the long run.
Yeah.
I would just like to maybe, I guess, add to that, if that's okay, is that I think that 3 or 5 years ago, it may have makes sense to say wait 3 or 5 years. To Lenzer's point, now it probably doesn't. I don't believe it makes sense to wait 3 or 5 years, but I think that we still might be talking about things like 3 or 5 years ago as if this is a binary decision, you do it or don't do it. I don't think that's the situation. I think it's about jumping in, but being cautious in how you jump in, making sure you have the right flexibility. And there's lots of different DERs, there's lots of different ways to use them, there's lots of different complexities in the program. So I recommend you do it. You just go slowly and cautiously. You don't run into the wall.
Very good. Obadiah, last word?
I would say I agree with all of the comments made
There you
so
go.
far. I was going to kind of lean towards Lorenzo's in terms of the urgency of moving. That's kind of what we're feeling right now, is if we want to maintain that relationship with customers, we need to be there in that space that they're moving towards, because others are definitely moving into that space and taking that relationship.
Very good. So, who has a question? Burning question. Stand up, yell it out. Go for it. Yep, right there. Okay, does anybody here want to comment?
Yeah, I want to comment because that was the Better Place model, right? Where they had the car charging, and I think there were just some practical logistics that have to be worked out. They owned the battery. How you got your battery stored, changed, moved, those logistics just weren't up to the U.S. expectations. And so, yes, it's possible. More to come.
And I'll just make a comment as a customer of Sonoma Clean Power and somebody who's participating in their car charging program. I heard about today some exciting things that they're going to be doing to actually address that without having to have replaceable batteries. So come talk to Jeff Cyphers at some point today if you want to learn more about it. I've been given the red sign. I'm sorry. If you guys have questions, please come up and talk to the panel during the break. Thank you all. Thank you to the panel. We appreciate your time.